What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton's worst qualifying in all 367 attempts of his Formula One career was not caused by a simple mistake, but by a chain of events that television cameras never revealed, and that changed the entire story of his night? You saw the timing screen show Hamilton in the 20th position, but you did not see the critical moment. Hidden inside the spray during his final preparation laps, Hamilton struck a track cone that may have become lodged beneath the floor of the Ferrari SF25 and instantly destabilized the aerodynamic platform he needed to survive the wet conditions. And you definitely did not hear the full radio confusion. At the decisive moment, Hamilton believed the session had ended after seeing red lights, while the team insisted he still had time to continue. That misunderstanding caused him to abandon the final lap that could have rescued him from elimination. Stay right here, because once you discover how the ice-like track surface, the freezing tires, the aero disturbance from the cone, and the communication breakdown all collided at the same moment, you will understand why Hamilton's Las Vegas disaster was far more than a qualifying nightmare. It was a perfect storm. The Las Vegas qualifying session unfolded under a rainstorm that pushed every car and every driver to the limit. The cold desert night stripped temperature from the asphalt faster than the tires could generate it, and the track transformed into a surface that felt more like polished glass than racing tarmac. Lewis Hamilton launched into the session ready to find the rhythm he has mastered so many times before in wet conditions, but the Ferrari SF25 resisted him immediately. On the out lap, the tires failed to build heat, the front washed wide through the first corners, and the rear stepped out as though the car were floating above the surface rather than gripping it. From the opening moments, it was clear that Hamilton was dealing not with difficulty, but with a mechanical battle he did not expect. As Hamilton attempted his first flying lap, the rain intensified and visibility shrank to almost nothing. Spray covered the visor, lights blurred into a red haze, and braking points became vague shapes rather than precise markers. In these conditions, a driver depends entirely on the consistency of the car beneath him, yet the SF25 behaved as though it refused to communicate. Engineers watching telemetry saw tire temperatures collapsing mid-lap, which meant that every corner offered less grip than the one before. Hamilton pushed through aquaplaning patches, responded to snap oversteer with instinct, and tried to regain confidence. But the tires would not hold heat, and the aerodynamic platform weakened with every sector. Then came the moment hidden from the public eye. During a preparation lap, as Hamilton approached a section of the track filled with standing water and heavy spray, he struck a cone that had been dislodged earlier in the session. The visibility was so limited that he had no chance of avoiding it. The impact appeared insignificant in the chaos, but for a ground effect car like the SF25, the underside is the most delicate aerodynamic region. If airflow beneath the floor is disturbed, even slightly, the car can lose downforce instantly. Hamilton continued driving unaware of the full implications, but the car's instability deepened immediately afterward, setting the stage for the collapse that followed. As Hamilton tried to recover momentum, the SF25 seemed to fight against him. The front axle would not engage on turn-in, leaving him sailing past the apex, while the rear would suddenly rotate as though a gust of wind had hit it. Engineers later compared the data before and after the cone impact, and the difference was stark. The aerodynamic load beneath the floor was fluctuating wildly, which matched Hamilton's feedback of a car that felt unpredictable in every phase of the lap. In wet conditions, when mechanical grip is already minimal, a disruption in underfloor airflow is the worst failure a driver can face. It steals confidence corner after corner. The decisive moment arrived near the end of the session. Hamilton positioned himself for what should have been his final chance to escape elimination. But then, through the spray, he saw red lights illuminating the pit straight, and he believed the session had ended. The team immediately radioed to tell him he still had time, but the message and the moment collided awkwardly. Hamilton hesitated, slowed, and the lap was lost before he could even begin it. In a session where conditions evolved by the second, that misunderstanding became fatal. The only lap that could have saved him vanished before it started, and the window of opportunity closed instantly. When the checkered flag appeared, Hamilton found himself in the 20th position, a result that stunned the paddock and left many spectators believing they had witnessed a simple driver error. But the truth was far more complex. The rain destroyed tire temperature. The cold asphalt offered no support. The cone strike compromised the aerodynamic foundation of the car, and the miscommunication sealed the outcome. What appeared to be a nightmare of Hamilton's making was actually the product of a perfect storm that unfolded beneath the spray, hidden from the cameras and misunderstood by almost everyone watching. Hamilton's qualifying nightmare in Las Vegas did not begin with a mistake. It began with a car that refused to cooperate in the most demanding conditions of the season. As soon as he turned into the first corners of his opening lap, the Ferrari SF25 revealed a complete inability to build tire temperature. The cold asphalt drained energy from the rubber faster than the car could generate it, leaving Hamilton with a front axle that drifted across the surface and a rear that refused to settle. He recognized immediately that the car was operating far below its intended window, and in wet conditions, that deficit becomes almost impossible to recover. As he tried to push harder, the problem grew more severe. The SF25 skated across patches of standing water and struggled to maintain contact with the road. Telemetry confirmed that tire temperatures were dropping well below the levels required for grip, meaning the aerodynamic platform beneath the car had nothing to stabilize it. Each time Hamilton turned the steering wheel, the tires responded with delayed movement, creating a disconnect between his inputs and the car's reactions. This instability robbed him of any opportunity to build rhythm, making every corner a fresh challenge rather than a step toward improvement. The second layer of the problem emerged as the rain intensified. Visibility shrank dramatically, with spray from the cars ahead turning the circuit into a narrow tunnel of distorted light and water. In these moments, a driver must rely entirely on the behavior of the car beneath him. But Hamilton had no such support. The Ferrari failed to bite into the apexes, the chassis floated under braking, and the rear stepped out in slow corners where the car should have remained stable. His radio updates reflected confusion rather than anger. The car was not misbehaving in a predictable way. It was changing its character from corner to corner, a sign that something deeper was wrong. Then came the moment that the public never saw. While preparing for another timed lap, Hamilton ran over a cone that had been dislodged earlier. The spray was so heavy that he had no chance to identify the object before hitting it. The contact seemed minor, but the SF25 relies on a delicate underfloor structure to generate consistent downforce. Any disturbance beneath the floor can disrupt airflow and collapse aerodynamic stability. Hamilton continued driving, unaware that the impact may have compromised the very part of the car he needed most in the wet. That hidden detail became one of the most important clues Ferrari uncovered after the session. From that moment forward, the behavior of the car deteriorated further. The instability shifted from inconsistent to chaotic, with abrupt changes in rotation and traction that did not match the expected influence of rain alone. Engineers later identified that the aerodynamic load beneath the floor fluctuated sharply after the impact, which would explain the increasingly unpredictable handling Hamilton experienced. A ground effect car depends on clean airflow to maintain balance. Any interruption to that airflow magnifies the effects of cold tires and standing water, creating a perfect storm in which the car becomes nearly impossible to control. By the time Hamilton attempted what should have been his decisive run, the problem had reached a point where no amount of skill could salvage the situation. The SF25 lacked grip, lacked stability, and lacked the aerodynamic foundation required to build a competitive lap. The conditions exposed every weakness of the car, and the hidden cone strike amplified those weaknesses until the Ferrari became unmanageable. What spectators interpreted as a qualifying error was actually the outcome of multiple converging failures. Hamilton was not fighting himself. He was fighting a machine that had already lost its ability to compete. The engineering analysis following Hamilton's Las Vegas collapse forced Ferrari to confront a series of mechanical and aerodynamic failures layered beneath the chaotic conditions. The first warning sign came from the tire temperature trace. The tires were never able to rise into the correct window and instead cooled continuously throughout the lap. For a ground effect car like the SF25, cold tires are not just an inconvenience. They destabilize the entire aerodynamic platform. The floor depends on the tires pushing the chassis into the surface, and when that force disappears, the airflow beneath the car becomes inconsistent. This created the opening weakness that defined Hamilton's night long before the decisive moments arrived. Ferrari then analyzed the aerodynamic load distribution, comparing Hamilton's car to others on the circuit. Even in identical conditions, the SF25 was losing vertical load much faster than its rivals, an indication that the underbody was not generating the suction effect required to stabilize the chassis. Engineers noted that the floor's pressure values were erratic during high-speed phases, a pattern that signaled either a fundamental sensitivity in the design or a structural disturbance affecting airflow. In wet conditions, the car must rely more heavily on aerodynamics because mechanical grip is limited, and Hamilton had neither. The data reflected a platform struggling to function. The turning point came with the cone impact. Ferrari reviewed the telemetry and noticed that Hamilton's instability worsened sharply immediately after he ran over the displaced cone hidden inside the spray. A ground effect car is vulnerable to even slight damage beneath the floor. The lower surface contains channels responsible for pressurizing and accelerating air, and a disruption in those channels can collapse downforce instantly. When the mechanics inspected the underside of the SF-25, they found marks in the exact locations where such a cone could strike. They were not the kind of dramatic fractures visible on camera, but the kind that quietly destroy aerodynamic consistency without causing a mechanical failure. Once Ferrari cross-referenced the underfloor markings with the aerodynamic data, the picture became clear. After the cone strike, the car exhibited turbulent airflow patterns beneath the floor. This turbulence translated into fluctuating downforce values throughout the lap, forcing Hamilton to drive a chassis that sometimes gripped, sometimes floated, and sometimes rotated violently with no warning. The telemetry showed oscillations in ride height that aligned perfectly with underbody disturbance. This told Vasseur that Hamilton was fighting a car whose ground effect system was failing in the worst possible conditions, leaving the tires cold and the chassis unstable. The engineers then examined Hamilton's steering input data. Before the cone strike, the corrections were controlled and proportional, even in the rain. After the impact, the steering movements grew larger, sharper, and more frequent, a sign that the rear axle was no longer responding predictably. The car entered corners with too little stability and exited them with too much rotation, forcing Hamilton to compensate continuously. This type of behavior is a hallmark of an aerodynamic imbalance beneath the floor, not a driving error. The instability was not something Hamilton could drive around. It was embedded in the car's altered airflow pattern.